Good afternoon and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Choti, and I'm a coordinator of student and alumni programs at the African Studies Center here at Michigan State University. And I would like to welcome each and every one of you to this African Tea Time series that we hold every other 2 weeks. And for those joining us for the first time, please feel welcome. And to the old members who have been part of the Tea Time from before, I'm welcoming you back to the session for today. So the topic that we're going to discuss is the language dilemma in Africa, local versus foreign, and the focus is going to be on Tanzania. So we're very privileged today to have speakers as well as a facilitator who have a very well-established background in research and teaching of African languages. And I know on the flyer we have a different name for the facilitator, but I want to introduce the person that is going to facilitate the tea time for today, and that's Mwalimu Jonathan Choti. And Mwalimu is an assistant professor also here at NSU, teaching African languages in the Department of Linguistics, Languages and Cultures. At this time, what I want to do, I will ask him to introduce himself further, and that's talk about what he teaches at NSU and any other thing that he feels good to talk about, after which he will go on to introduce the speakers for the day and then continue with the rest of the program. So, Mwalimu Choti, I welcome you.
Thanks so much, Damaris, and thanks for the opportunity to facilitate this important discussion centering on African languages and maybe extending to African cultures. You are right, you just introduced me, and I only add to the introduction that I also teach a class on African cultures, languages and literature in the College of Arts programs in the College of Arts and Letters at MSU. Now, our speakers today, they are going to present briefly, and then we will invite audience to ask questions. So we are going to begin by listening to Mutashobya, and then later on, Dr. Ngonyani. I don't know how many minutes Damaris they're supposed to speak. How do we know?
Yes, we have, okay, today's session, I think it's going to be a little different because we have two speakers on one country. So each speaker will have about 45 minutes. And then we can have a discussion up to, let's say, starting from 5:15, we'll start the discussion until the end. Thank you for asking that. I should have.
Yeah, thank you. But now as facilitator, I think I have some powers. So the speakers, Damaris has mentioned 45 minutes. You really don't have to speak for 45 minutes if you think you're speaking too much. So, you know, sometimes you might think that, are they everybody listening really? Or can I just do some minutes less than 45? Then the rest you will take up on Q&A. That's okay. So feel free to take that from me. A quick introduction about our speakers today or this evening. I'll start with Dr. Deo. Deo Ngonyani is Associate Professor of Linguistics and African Languages at Michigan State University. He obtained his bachelor's and his BA and MA in Linguistics from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and his PhD in Linguistics from University of California, Los Angeles. He has taught in high schools in Tanzania in the 1980s, and later on he taught linguistics and Swahili at the University of Dar es Salaam, at USLA too, Indiana University, Pwani University in Kenya, and currently at Michigan State. Dr. Deo's Ngonyani's research and publication focus on the structure of words, especially in Bantu languages, language documentation and description, and Swahili language and culture. Abdul Mutashobya as a BA with education from also University of Dar es Salaam, which he earned in 2015 to teach Swahili and English in high school. He taught at Ubungo Islamic High School in Dar es Salaam. And this alone, he got funding through the Fulbright program, Foreign Language Teaching Assistant Program, to Michigan State University in 2017 to 2018. He taught Swahili at MSU. And when he returned back to Tanzania in 2018, he worked at the United World Colleges, East Africa, at Moshi in Tanzania, which is a private school offering the IB, I think International Baccalaureate. I don't know what that's true, the name for 2018 to 2021. Currently, Muta is a master's student in our department, Languages, Linguistics, and Cultures, taking the master's program in TESOL. I think TESOL stands for, is it teaching English to speakers of other languages, Muta?
Yes.
Muta, you can see, thanks for answering that, and then you can go now with your 45 minutes.
Thank you so much. Let me try to share my screen.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't think I have to repeat any of the things here because thank you so much actually for helping me to introduce myself. So I'm going to take you through the structure of my presentation today. Yes, so I'm going to give you an overview of the country Tanzania for those of you who might be wondering where Tanzania is. And then we'll come to the topic of the day, which is language dilemma. And I'll give my suggestions of what I think as the country we should do. And then I will allow Q&A. So Tanzania is in the side of East Africa, the continent. As you can see, we border with Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Malawi, Congo. So we are in the middle of all these countries. And you can tell how the weather is like in Tanzania by looking at how proximity we are with the equator. The country is close to 16 million people. That's the recent data. And the capital is Dodoma. That's a pretty recent capital because it used to be Dar es Salaam and now they've moved it to Dodoma. And it as big as, you know, twice California, the state of California. It is a multi-religions. The most predominant religion, I think, is Christian and then Muslim. But as you can tell, in many African countries, religion hasn't been an issue because we live in harmony. We depend on each other and we help each other. Our currency is Tanzanian shilling, which is $1 is equal to 2,300. And for many families, that is enough for a meal, for a day meal. So maybe let me jump to the color of the flag, the colors of the flag of Tanzania. So green represent vegetables and agricultural resources, and yellow minerals, black for people, and blue for water resources. And that's how diversity is, like different ethnic groups that speak their own languages. That means different languages. Things to see in Tanzania, we have a Serengeti National Park, like popular for a great migration. And then we have Kilimanjaro, which is the highest freestanding mountain in the world. And then that city, Dar es Salaam. Some of us might have had African countries or equated to wildlife, but also there are things like those one cities. Yes, another thing to visit, to see in Tanzania is the Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa, and that's where actually I'm from, because I'm from the northern west part of the country. And then Ngorongoro crater, which is one of the 7 natural wonders of Africa. I think both of these ones are in that list. Our government, we've had 6 presidents, different terms. Currently, we have a female, the first female president of Africa, maybe East Africa as well. And the ruling part has been CCM, like Chama cha Mapinduzi, since independence. And then the major opposition party currently is Chadema, which is the Chama cha Demokrasia na Maendeleo. That's an acronym. Our economy depends on small-scale industries. So we have agricultural processing industries. We process sugar, beer, cigarettes, twine, and we also do mining activities. We also have tourism as one of the economic activities. But you know, as in many other countries in the world, the tourism in Tanzania has now been affected by COVID because people are not coming in the country. Yeah, agriculture, we do have. I can get customers here. That's why I'm trying to showcase what we have in Tanzania. So coffee, TESOL, tea, cotton, vanilla. We also have lots of cattle and livestock. Cultural, I'm not going to talk a lot about culture, but maybe because I love food. So we have matoke, especially where I'm from, has the most popular one. Some people call them green. I just forgot the word in English, but it's matoke in Swahili. These ones on the right, green plantains. I don't think they're plantains actually, but there is another word for that. And then rice beans, that's super common. And then we have ugali, and ugali is it's kind of a dough made by corn flour, and then samaki, fish. These kind of foods are my favorite. So the Swahili name for this one is grasshoppers. I mean, it's a senene. People call them grasshoppers, but they don't look like grasshoppers. So those who are from Uganda maybe might relate with me, because it's also a popular food in Uganda. And then matoke. All right, maybe before we continue, I wanted to get some feedback from you guys, because we're going to be talking about language dilemma. I want to, and focusing on language of instructions. So I want to hear from you, what language did you learn in from early childhood? Was it your first language, your second language, or your foreign language? You can put that in the chat. I want to kind of get an idea of what, or if this will make sense, trying to make to create a context. So remember to tell us the language you learned in, and if it was the first language or second language or a foreign language. Learned in French, that was their first language. Thank you. So it's in the first language also. That one was taught in English. Was it your first language, or English, the first language as well? Prosper, what was the, native language? Oh, perfect. I would think that this language was were taught at the same time. I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hand in hand.
Oh, okay. Perfect. And Walawale, English as the second language? Yeah. Professor Dale, Kiswahili from Standard 1 to 7, and English from Form 1. Of course, we're going to focus on that one. Damaris Kisi, my first language, up to second grade. The English was introduced yeah, all the way to college. Okay, thank you so much. I think this helped me to kind of start my discussion based on this data. Thank you so much. So yes, so let us look at language diversity in Tanzania and the decision of choosing Swahili being a language of instructions at lower levels, maybe in primary school, and then switching to English when we go to secondary school. As we've seen, Tanzania is a home of incredible linguistic diversity. So with more than 120 local languages, and Kiswahili, my local language means first languages to many people. For example, my first language is Haya, and then Kiswahili was my second language, and then English, which is a foreign language, and other foreign languages as well, like French and Mandarin, at least at the moment, because I'm seeing a lot of universities now in Tanzania introducing Mandarin as a foreign language. And some universities actually make it a requirement for people's degrees. So local languages are spoken at home and in day-to-day interaction among speakers. I remember my time as a student at my school, even my teachers would communicate with me in my first languages, which is Haya. Although Kiswahili was language of instructions at that time, but you know, all the explanation, the concept was given in Haya. And even teachers from other regions who came to teaching in my country, in my region, had to learn Haya for them to be able to communicate with the community around and the students, to facilitate that kind of communication and help the student to acquire Swahili as the second language. Local languages under significant threat, maybe of extinction, but Mwalimu Deo is going to talk more about that. I should not really focus on that. And Kiswahili is a linguistic and cultural identity of Western and Central African countries. And this is so obvious for people from Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo. We all identify ourselves as Swahili speakers, Swahili people. But English is a foreign language that serves as a language of highest prestige in the country, which was established through years of colonial rule. So let's focus on Kiswahili and how it became the language of instructions. So after independence, a decision was made to use Kiswahili as a language of instructions. And the reason was there was a long years of recognizing Swahili as a unifying factor of the country, and a political tool to kind of facilitate communication between leaders and people they serve. So I believe this was a strategic decision to make that was made to ensure national unity, as I already said, that has up to 120 local languages. So the use of Kiswahili was crucial for students to develop an understanding of the content being covered. So because at that point, I believe many students could learn and understand Swahili easily rather than any other languages. Basically, because Swahili is a Bantu language, the structure and some words are from Bantu, like the majority of the words are Bantu words. So it is used to translate and demonstrate meaning within student frame of references and engage student in learning. Kiswahili is a defining aspect of nationhood in Tanzania, so it has brought people together. We don't have that tendencies of hearing people referring themselves to tribes, for example, maybe ethnicity. You hear people say just because they're speaking the same language, people calling themselves Tanzanians rather than Haya sometimes, or Sukuma or Ndendeule, which are all tribes. So it is a lingua franca of East African countries and understood in many countries of the world. And this is very true when you go to East Africa, you go to Congo, you'd find people speaking Swahili. You go to Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, of course, Kenya, the majority of Kenyans speak Swahili, and Uganda as well. English. So English was also introduced as a language of instruction in secondary school, like from Form 1 to like beyond secondary school, high school, and universities. It was also legalized to be used as a language of instructions in primary school, but in private English medium schools. So a few Tanzanian can afford English medium schools, so most children attend Swahili medium government school. So the education in government schools is accessed using Swahili primary schools, but the education in private schools, especially the English mediums, is accessed using English. So English is a foreign language in the country, as most Tanzanians use their local languages as their first language, and Kiswahili being the second language. However, English is also the country's official language and is very highly valued. If you ask students, even those who are learning in Swahili, learning in English, but they are confused, they don't understand it, they will tell you that they need to learn English because they want to integrate, they want to get good jobs, they want to sometimes travel abroad, like myself. Yeah. So ideally, English is equated to education, yet many students face difficulties learning the language. So as a result, there has been growing demand for places at primary English medium primary school. So many parents take their students, or maybe they're working so hard to take their students to English medium primary schools. And because of course, we'll talk more about the inequality and the economic situation of the country, but that is posing a problem as well. So the problem associated with English, for example, there's a limited exposure. As we say that English is not a second language in Tanzania, it's currently a foreign language. So very, very few people speak the language. And many offices, of course, the Tanzania police has made English as one of the official languages as well. That means some government documents are written in English, but everything, like the communication, is done in Kiswahili, although the documents might be written in English. So the exposure of using English is very limited. And in the classroom, students have low confidence of speaking the language, and due to lack of self-esteem. And this is actually facilitated or maybe promoted by the culture of what communication should be in classroom. For example, students don't have this culture of asking questions in class. So that kind of interaction is not there. And just because they cannot open their mouth to speak the language or to engage in language, then they're not confident. And then lack of effective foreign language and second language teacher training, and maybe this could be associated by to the teaching approaches that have been used in the country, maybe that to teach the language itself. And then the parents as resources and student language foundation. So for example, we know that if you want your kid to develop language literacy, they should be exposed to books, and many parents at home, they don't have books. They don't have technologies. Giving their kids phone to access these apps that they can use to learn vocabularies, or maybe access YouTube videos to listen to speakers of English. And then another thing is government resource provision. So teacher training, that has been a huge resource. A huge problem. So if you want to prepare very well trained teachers to teach the language, I think you need to expose them to to excellent programs as well. And then learning and teaching infrastructure. These actually include aspects of, you know, having a huge classroom, for example, or not having enough facilities to teach the language itself in schools. So this dilemma of whether to choose between Swahili and English in teaching at secondary school, specifically, has led to high dropout rates because many students are just confused. They feel like, you know, education is not for them because they cannot understand the content. Fair enough sometimes. And those who persist and complete, they're not proficient in the language. And that gap that has been created by the, you know, the role of English medium private schools and government schools lead to poor academic performances, especially for those who had limited exposure in government schools. Of course, we're saying that there has been some attempt to amend or change the language of instructions, but then those efforts had a backlash. People have been fearing that changing from Swahili to English, changing from English to Swahili as a medium of instructions in a secondary school would mean that they need to translate books, for example, that are written in English. And that needs money. And then to distribute those books throughout the countries, that also needs money. So I believe the government might not be ready for that. And then when you are changing the curriculum, that means you also have to think of way of testing it. And that hasn't been convenient to the government. And that large disparity between the upper and lower class has also, and now is actually becoming even bigger, the disparity, because you see that many politicians in the country as the one that are upper class, like the upper class people, and they don't really send their kids to government. Many of them, I would say, to government primary schools. So they send their kids to English medium primary schools, and sometimes some of them to international schools, and even some of them send them to foreign countries to learn. And that might translate to, you know, they're willing to improve education system in the country for the benefit of all. And then people have been fearing that if we teach in Swahili, we might lose opportunities to integrate with the foreigners, or maybe to do business with other countries, because English is a lingua franca, it is a language of the world. And then the costs of implementing teacher training, that has been the real issue, especially, I believe, at the government level. It has been an excuse that there's no money to do that. What should we do? This is my ideas, what I think should be done. So in 2015, there was an education policy that suggested we switch from English to Swahili as a language of instruction throughout the education system. And the reason is Swahili is the second language, it is understood by so many people, and even those who, and the population speaking Swahili, the first language, is actually growing because of the movement and intermarriage. And then, yeah, but that hasn't been done. So, and then I think we should invest in training educators to improve their proficiency and build their confidence. And we need to maximize the English exposure to our kids in schools, and that could be done through English clubs at school and maybe radio programs. I believe in the audience there might be good people to talk about this. and then teach English earlier and better. So if the decision, for example, is made to make English as a language of instructions, which I believe Kenyans have done from the beginning, I believe the level of proficiency of English language could be different at the moment in Tanzania. Or maybe if you want to teach English earlier and better in that sense, teach English as a subject, and then introduce it from maybe kindergarten. It doesn't have to wait until standard 4 to teach it as a subject. I'm sorry, I'm just tired. So as you may have seen,
I'm sorry, could I ask a question?
Sure.
On your previous slide about what you think should be done.
Yeah.
You said implement the new 2015 education policy on language of instruction, Kiswahili, at all levels of education. So does that mean that, so currently what I know of is that the primary school, the testing, I think, is done in Kiswahili?
The testing is in Kiswahili at primary school.
So are you saying that even in secondary, it should be the same as primary and the lower classes?
Yes, that's my stand. I believe if people learn better when they learn in the language they understand.
So then if that's what you're arguing, why should we teach English earlier and better?
Yeah, I was because the argument even of the students, they want English.
Right.
I believe it is possible to learn both languages at the same time better and become fluent.
Right. So then as a fluent person in both Kiswahili and English.
Yeah.
So are we canceling English and teaching it only as a subject, or are we, like, what are we doing? What's the solution?
That's right. I believe if we teach it as a subject and teach it better, we'll produce people who can communicate in English. But
so,
at the moment, people who can communicate very well in English are those who had exposure to English since primary, for example, those who go through the English medium primary schools.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think, so are you saying even if they learn English earlier when they're younger, even if they're in secondary school, they'll still use Kiswahili?
Yes, because if they learn English earlier and they're younger, somebody actually raised their hand. Let me check. Do you want to speak, Dr. Damaris?
No. Before she speaks, can you finish that? You were answering.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was saying that Swahili has been a language of everyone in Tanzania. So students are more proficient in Swahili than English. And if we can learn in a language that we understand, we can liberate our mind. We can do things with what we learn. But learning in a language that we don't understand sometimes make it hard for us to benefit from the goals of education itself. That was my thinking.
Yeah, so before Damaris says what she wants to say, thanks so much, Atpaxie, for your question, and Muta for your response. I forgot to say at the beginning, after the presentations or after the first presentation or both, Damaris can give us guidance. Then we have Q&A where we can go deeper into the questions. So Damaris.
Okay.
That's okay.
Actually, you've responded to what I was trying to say. I was thinking if we can let the speakers finish and then we can do a QA and then continue. Not to cut you short, that's good. Only that maybe somebody else may have an additional question. I was just trying to say, if you can let Muta speak and then go into the QA after. But thank you.
Are we going QA after the first speaker or after both?
I think because it's the same countries, let's do both, because usually we have a QA after each speaker, but given that Mwalimu Deo might have some overlapping thoughts, so let's finish the presentations and then we can go straight to QA for both discussions. Right. Yes.
So thanks for the direction. And then I'm going to say, if maybe you have a question you don't want to forget, maybe you are leaving, please put it on the chat so that we make sure we respond to your question. Muta, you can proceed.
Thank you so much. I was about to finish anyway. So yeah, that has been my stand about languages. I believe we think we should, of course, there's a lot of research on that as well, teaching our languages, because these are the languages we're comfortable in. And then thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Muta. If you can unshare your slides, that was great. So I think we can transition to Mwalimu Ngonyani.
Thank you. Let me have my presentation. Okay. Okay, so my talk is going to be about triglossia and language endangerment in Tanzania, since this is the thing that has taken much of my time lately. I'll give you an overview of the linguistic diversity in Tanzania, and then talk about triglossia, language endangerment, and I will try to address the question, why do we care? Do we care at all? And then some concluding remarks. So Abdul already talked about these basics. Probably 60 million people in Tanzania, and the diversity can be seen in both in terms of the number of languages in the country and the families to which they belong. There are 126 languages according to Ethnologue, 118 indigenous languages and 8 non-indigenous languages. But even that number, the accuracy of that number is difficult to determine, because as you look at other publications like Atlas ya Lugha za Tanzania in 2009, they list 150 different languages. And even then you find that some languages are not listed, but you do find them in Ethnologue. So famously, TESOL is not listed. And one of the editors of Atlas ya Lugha Tanzania was also my researcher on TESOL. And so you see, all the languages are probably not listed in the two lists, and there are several other languages. But also the question of the number of languages is difficult to tell because of difficulties of defining languages versus dialects. Linguists are famous for always defining languages or dialects as being varieties of languages that are mutually intelligible. If you went by that criterion, you would find this large tract of land here in the western part of Tanzania speak 2 languages, Sukuma in the north and Nyamwezi in the south, but they're basically mutually intelligible. So you could argue that they are actually just dialects of the same language. So the numbers are big, but complex, and we cannot tell for sure. All we know is a large number of languages, as you can see on the map from Atlas ya Lugha Tanzania, all these patches, and they differ in sizes. Some are large. Sukuma here is about 9 to 10 million people, and some other languages here are like 10,000, and Hadza probably 2,000, and so on. So in terms of language families, also very diverse in that the languages in Tanzania can be found in all 4 super language families of Africa. You know, in the north here, North Afro-Asiatic languages, and then the purple here is Nilo-Saharan, Niger, Congo, the main part here, brown, where Bantu belongs, and then Khoisan in Southern Africa, and some people argue 2 languages in Tanzania are also Khoisan. And then these other languages, Indo-European or Austronesian, we're not going to talk about them. But I wanted to just zoom into Tanzania, and you go and see a large part of it is Bantu languages. And then you have this purple here is Nilo-Saharan, like Maasai. And you also see this yellowish part here, Afro-Asiatic languages such as Iraq, or also called Mbulu. And then these two bluish areas, two languages, Sandawe and Hadza. And linguists are not totally agreed whether they're quiescent, but judging from how they have structure in terms of their sound systems and a little bit of the grammar, some have often stated that they are quiescent. So all the four major language families are represented in Tanzania. Triglossia. So majority of the people grow up with at least two languages. And if you speak only two languages, you're like probably the minority. Okay, so you use Swahili when you go to school, the marketplace, to the store, you find it in the media. Most of the books are written in Swahili. You go to church, to mosque, that's the language you're going to find. And then there are local languages, which are spoken mostly at home with kinsfolk and tribal functions and so on. And then there is English, which is used in higher education, business, media, technology, and so on. And so here, just like Abdul, Abdul grew up from here. I grew up in the South here, speaking Ndendeule and Swahili. Those were the languages I spoke. This area is Ndendeule. And we used Ndendeule at home, especially when you spoke to your elders, parents and grandparents. When I spoke to my siblings, it was kind of mixed. And, but when, as soon as you stepped out and went to the market, for example, or the store, you used Swahili. Even when the sellers at the market or the store also were Ndendeule speakers, we kind of automatically switched to Swahili. And of course, church and mosque were all in Swahili. I also learned language of our neighbors, Ngoni, and I lived briefly in this part, the western part, not near Lake Nyasa or Lake Malawi. I also picked a little bit of that. So third grade, that's when I was introduced to English. And so the three languages that I operated most with, Ndendeule, Swahili, and Ngoni, and then now the fourth language became English. So I went to school already proficient in Swahili. I didn't, so unlike Abdul, I didn't go to school and have teachers actually teach me in Ndendeule. In fact, the school I went to, I think there were only two Ndendeule teachers, my dad and someone else out of school with 10 or so teachers. So, the other teachers were from all over the country, from other places. And so they did not even learn to speak our language. Multilingualism, therefore, is the norm. So the idea of triglossia is an extension of the concept of diglossia that linguists have developed for many years. Diglossia refers to the Arabic situation in which everyone learns to write and speak standard Arabic in formal situations. But wherever they are, whether in Morocco or Sudan or Iraq, they also have their local varieties. And so these two basically almost different varieties of the language have different functional roles. Now that concept has been extended to the African situation where people have three or more languages, and these are all functionally different. Widely called it linguistic trifocalism, but Abdulaziz calls it triglossia. So you have the vernacular languages for family and local communication. So could be Maasai, could be He, could be Ndendeule or higher. And then there is an indigenous national language for wider communication and commerce and technology and education and so on. That's Swahili in this case. And then there is the international language for commerce, education, technology, and so on. That's English. So given this situation, we find that there are several languages in the country that are kind of in danger of disappearing. A language becomes endangered when its users begin to teach and speak the more dominant language to their children. And UNESCO says a language is endangered when it is on the path to extinction. A language is in danger when its speakers cease to use it in increasingly reduced number of communicative domains, and cease to pass it on from one generation to another. And there is different levels of endangerment. You can see from level 3 here, that's when you see there is a danger. If a language is used by all ages, from children up, then you know it's safe. But when the language is used by some children in all domains, it is used by all children in limited domains, it's a little bit unsafe. And then when the language is used mostly by the parental generation and up, that's where you see very immediate danger. And the language used mostly by the grandparents and generations up, that's severely endangered. And when it's spoken by very few speakers, then it's critically endangered. And when there is no speaker alive for the language is dead. So how does this happen? Again, you can only look at the numbers and see the use of the language in different domains decreasing, okay? So for example, if you begin to see increasingly that even at home, the local language is not being used. Instead, the non-local language is used, that's a sign that there is a shift. And then you can find people stop using the language completely and they shift to something else, something that we observe in some of the ethnic communities. And then adults stop speaking to the indigenous language to the younger ones. That's a very clear sign that things are changing. Eventually, there is going to be no intergenerational transmission of the language from one generation to another. A while back, I looked at several places in Tanzania and found the change in domains of use was actually showing up according to different ages. You could argue that people change their speaking habits, but this is what I found, that among people, young people 18 and below, when they were asked about what language they used mostly in their everyday life, a large percentage say they use Swahili, and a small percentage would say they use other languages. And then as you go to the older age, you find, the older people use more of the indigenous language than the Swahili language. So there is that shift that is happening in the language. So once more, the question of endangerment is not something that you can put as a blanket for every language. No, neither can you say this is a question of just the number of speakers of the language. Because I studied one language called Kikisi on the northern shores of Lake Nyasa, and estimated about 20,000 speakers, all multilingual in Swahili and Kikisi and some other languages. But I noticed that the language was also under pressure from other neighboring languages. However, this language is relatively stable compared to my own language, which I estimate to be spoken by 200,000 speakers. The pressure on this language is mainly from Swahili. But what I noticed is that younger people from my district do not speak the language very much. In fact, I have this favorite episode of mine. I went home, I think it was 2007, and I met my nieces. They were in secondary school. I think they were in Form 1 or Form 2. And I started speaking to them in Ndendewule, and they said they don't speak that language. So I said, okay, I'm sorry. I had brought some presents for my daughters, and I know my daughters speak my language, and you guys don't speak my language. You're probably not my daughters. So, and they were stunned. And then the next day they came in the morning and greeted me in Ndebele and spoke fluent Ndebele. So they do actually speak the language, but they don't want to speak the language. So there is that danger that is happening. There is a shift in language use. And this is leading to some languages disappearing. And so do we care about that? There is considerable debate. Some people said we should care and some people say we shouldn't care. It's not a big deal. We shouldn't. Why? Because languages are like organisms. They grow and die. And they make room for other languages that are more efficient or more effective. It's like a general evolutionary process where you have less efficient languages disappearing. And also that fewer languages are better for global communication of a new global humanity. So shift is due to the community evaluation of the value of their language. Also shift is a result of the search for economic advantages, social mobility, and political power. For this reason, some people feel like let things roll as they are. But there's also another side of that, which is when you think of language, you have to think of it not just as a tool of communication. You have to think of it also as a library. A language represents a people's outlook of the world, an expression of their human experience, an expression of knowledge gathered through ages, through years in a specific geographical or ecological locale. And it is also an expression of how speakers of a language survived, lived, they understood the world they were in, and an expression of people's identity and their aspirations. So what does language death mean then? It means the loss of data on the nature of language, a particular language, but it is also a loss, a irrecoverable loss of the library and much of the knowledge that is in that library. A loss of a language also affects linguistic diversity. And if we talk of diversity, you're going to see that biodiversity is important. Likewise, linguistic diversity or cultural diversity is very, very important in human existence and human experience. And so loss of a language ultimately means the loss of a foundation on which to build new knowledge systems which merge with indigenous knowledge systems. Okay, what did I say? I want to conclude by saying that Tanzania is a country of considerable linguistic diversity and that most people are multilingual. Swahili and English are official languages, while Swahili is the national language, the language of national identity. However, for many years, the indigenous languages other than Swahili have received little attention. In some cases, they were almost sabotaged so that we don't do much about them. And as a result, they are now disappearing. We are observing a language shift in many areas in favor of Swahili and completely losing the indigenous languages. But fortunately, some linguists are now beginning to care and working to document and hopefully revitalize some of those languages. Asanteni sana. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ngonyani, Abdul, Mutashobya. Thanks, audience, for your patience, and thanks for coming in to listen to this discussion. I haven't seen any questions on the chat. Atukakie Mwandenga, did you exhaust your questions? Now we are going to Q&A.
It's
yes.
Atupakisia.
Thank you.
It's Atupakisia.
Atupakisia, dear.
Yeah, but you can call me Atu, it's fine.
Which language is that, Mwandenga?
It's a tribal language in Tanzania, Tanzania.
What's the name of that ethnic language?
Nyakyusa probably, huh?
Yeah, the Nyakyusa. Nyakyusa, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How do you say hi, all of you in Nyakyusa?
Pambombo.
Oh yeah, asante sana. Karibu. So go ahead with you. Have any remaining question or a follow-up?
So I had so for the first speaker, I wanted to ask a clarifying question.
There's some noise in your background. I don't know whether it's from you or your environment.
It is definitely from me. Let me get to a quieter area. Okay. So my question is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks. Go ahead.
There was.
Seems we lost you. The internet isn't cooperating.
Education or the spread of English. Can I write it in the chat?
Yes, please. Asia Paksia is writing a question on the chat. Any other person, we will get the question when it's complete. Anybody else who has a question or a comment, you're welcome. You can raise your hand, Damaris.
Yes, I have a quick question for Mwalimu Dewa. I heard you mention that you, in your community, then you could speak in Dendeule at home with your parents, especially the elders. Why is it that when you switch to the marketplace and it is within the same community, there was that trend of speaking Swahili? Like, what do you think was the reason behind that? Because I would imagine since everybody is speaking Dendeule, then let's go ahead and use it within the community. So I'm just curious about why was the transition just so natural that now I'm not at home, I'm gonna speak Swahili?
So I'm not too sure why, but there are many things that go into it. I think part of it is history and the culture of the different areas, and that you'll find reflected in different parts of the country. It has to do with how a community perceived itself, right? Vis-a-vis others. How did a community perceive itself in the bigger stage of the country? So if you think city people are sophisticated, they speak Swahili. You come with your Ndendele, you're not really sophisticated, right? And so you step outside of the home, you want to show you are also, you know, you're sophisticated, you are in the modern world, and you begin to see the traditional community and the traditional language, your mother tongue, as part of the kind of backward, old kind of life, and so you go to the new language. That's how I felt when I was growing up.
Wow.
Thank you, Damaris. Isaac Kalungu, your hand was up.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your presentations. Mwalimu Ngonyani, I have a question for you. Am I correct in thinking that the issue of whether a language that is dying should be saved or let to die is going to be solved by the issue of resources rather than anything else? It would appear to me that a dying language would require a lot of training, a lot of writing, a lot of work to resuscitate it. And because we are talking about countries and where economic issues are a major problem, the governments, which are responsible for education, are going to say, we are not going to spend money to save a language that's dying. After all, we have Kiswahili, and that then becomes what resolves the issue. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair, and actually very, very accurate. So for many of us, the idea of saving languages is a very difficult one. It often sounds very good, especially when it's put in the media. They would say, oh, this guy is studying this language, trying to save this language, right? It's easier to say that, but we know that's very, very difficult, almost impossible in most cases. And what we can do is document, describe them, and put it as a depository somewhere in a library and in the books and so on. But we also have found, we have also experienced in some other areas that just a little effort may help to revitalize, put a little more life into the language. So a few years back, you may remember I worked with Anne and 2 colleagues from East Africa to go study a language in Tanga in Tanzania. Probably like 2,000 or 3,000 speakers left. And the story is the younger people are not interested in the language at all. And so we were pressured by the elders from that community to do something about this, because we were going to study the language and just write the grammar and dictionary, whatever. And they were more interested in what could be done to the community rather than us just coming. And so we compromised and ended up writing a book that was a grammar with a dictionary. And this was given for free to the villages. It was a huge thing for the villages because the young people started seeing that, oh, this is a, you know, it's just a language. It's a very sophisticated language. You can even write, you can even, and they showed interest in trying to use the language in the community. That's what we got from that. So in that sense, you can see there could be a little life that is put into it. For languages that are completely gone, it's very difficult to get them back. You know, this is not done. You know, people have been able to do it with Hebrew, but otherwise it's usually not done. A language goes in that direction and dies. It's very difficult to do anything. And you're right, the resources that are required, because Hebrew was able to be revived because there were resources that had to be poured in. And it's very difficult in a country of 120 plus languages with more than 3/3 of them dying. It's going to be a monumental task to invest and put into resources into those languages so that they are, you know, they are revived. But we can put a little bit of life and even interest and have the younger people, you know, a little bit keep it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Isaac, go ahead.
Oh, so yeah, I was just going to say that there are very great parallels between language and music. You know, as a musician, very, very cognizant of the fact that some of the musics are dying as well, the musical traditions in the same way, you know, and a little work, if people come to a village and record some of the music and put it on the radio, that really revives it in the community where they come from and say, wow, listen to us on the radio.
Right.
Sounds really great. But without something like that, musics are dying because the young people find no value in it, which is the point you made earlier about choosing Swahili over other languages because you become more hip, you become more town-wise, and you become more current. And then, so that's really a tragedy that both language and music and other arts have to die because of lack of focus.
Right.
Yeah, thanks so much for the comment and the question, Isaac. And that also underlines the point that language and the music and others we can name are cultural entities. And they undergo change, they are under pressure for change. Different will have different opinions on whether the change should be accepted or it should be confronted and things like that. So those are really, really contemporary issues when it comes to globalizing or colonialism and things like that. So good comments and the question. We can always come back to the same question if need be. I want to go to Atupakisia again, Mandenga, which has 2 questions. One is for Muta, the first one. Now, Muta, the question is on the chat. Are you advocating for the spread of English or the visions of the education system in Tanzania?
Thank you, Atu, for that question. I think I'm advocating for academic success in Tanzania, and I acknowledge the role of language in education. Of course, it's not one factor that is that we can focus on to improve the education system of Tanzania, but it's a huge factor because of the effects or maybe impact that it brings when it comes to learning. So I believe that when students are just confused, they learn in a language that they don't understand, there is a limit use of that language in the country, there is a problem with accessing material. For example, the infrastructure of schools that include the buildings, the teachers, and everything that is affecting the teaching of English as a subject and also as a language of instructions, because people have to learn, students have to learn through English. So I think the academic achievement or success is at the heart of my argument. So I believe students could do better if they learn in a language they understand, and in that context, Swahili is the language that is understood by many Tanzanians.
Thank you. The second question, Emmanuel and Joe, I see your hands up. Let's exhaust these questions from Wandenga. The second question is from Walimdeo Ngonyani. Could tribal, maybe I could say like ethnic languages, could ethnic languages represent division rather than difference? Because with the one language, Tanzanians are more united. What do you say?
Apparently that may have been the fear that has caused the kind of passive suppression of the ethnic languages. Definitely. So I'm imagining we got our independence in 1961 in Tanganyika, and with 120 plus ethnic communities, you want to have several different languages, for example, for their schools, right? One community that has about 10,000 speakers, you want to have translations of the books, and you want to have the teachers trained in that language also. That becomes a little more complicated. And so the use of one language for the education system, as well as for the political system, was a huge advantage that actually united people and felt that they are one country. But I think we can talk of the differences too. We can talk of the differences rather than divisions in the country. And so the unity of Tanzania was not achieved just through the use of Swahili. Swahili was one of the things, but it also rode on a number of other things, and Swahili helped in everything. So for example, traditional institutions that may have been there for some of the ethnic communities, right? Like the chiefdoms or whatever, they were completely abolished. The idea was to weaken these allegiances to smaller polities and focus on national unity. There have been some problems and other things that may have happened, but I think on the whole, it is possible to have several languages that we speak and not necessarily lead to division. When we use English now, different parts of the world, when we use English, we don't have a problem that that focuses on our languages as things that identify us against everyone else. Neither do we use English as necessarily a unifying force. In some places, yes, it has been a unifying force. In Nigeria and some other places, it has been a unifying force. So what I'm simply saying is that the language question is a much more complex thing. It's not an easy one that you say, well, we promote one language, therefore unity. You allow other languages to thrive, therefore that is going to be disunity and division. So it's a little more complex. I don't have a very clear answer for how that might work for any particular country.
Thanks so much for that response. Emmanuel and then Joe.
That was actually a very good presentation from both of you. So I think Professor Ngonyani probably answered some of the questions that I had. I come from Kenya, and the issue of language and that tribalism really affects the unity of the country, like mostly in politics. So I was just actually wondering, how is it like in Tanzania regarding like the national unity and the languages that you guys speak? It's like 160. For us, it's just like around 48 different tribes, but it's causing a lot of problem. back in Kenya. So I was just wondering how you guys deal with different speaking and also like the national unity.
So can I go first?
Go ahead.
So my opinion is that there may be some other underlying problems, and politicians would always capitalize on what they see as things that they can use as fissures and split people. So the problem does not lie in the language as such, but politicians will quickly pick on that and divide people along the lines that emphasize their differences. And that was not the case with Nyerere. I think Nyerere was very much aware of the problem even before independence. He used to write about it and talked about it. And so it became something that everyone else had to pay attention to. So for example, in many cases, it was considered impolite for you to speak your native language in the presence of other people who don't speak the language, right? So if you are, you have two people from Muta's district and they speak their language in a community where you have 1 or 3 other people who do not speak that language, it was considered impolite. But then you also still had a lot of people who were still doing that, and were considered those impolite, selfish people that do that. So yeah, again, it comes somewhere from the top also to how to use the differences.
Thank you. Joe, your hand has been up for a while. It's your time. Then I will go to Olawale with a question on the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you to Muta, my own brother. I'm Joe from Liberia. Muta, my question is directed to you. I look at your last slide that you presented, but I realized that your recommendations were purely qualitative in nature, right? But when it comes to applications, I see that not to be possible. So if we were to like practicalize this, take for instance, in my country, Liberia, we don't have many languages, but I would like to link this with probably, let's say, the exchange rate. But Liberia is the only country in Africa that has 2 currency, the US dollars and dollar of the Liberian dollar, right? So there have been like long-term debate over de-dollarizing the Liberian dollars to ignore the US dollar and come back to the Liberian dollar. So now let's link this to your context, where your country is faced with multiple languages and all of that. Right now, in one of the recommendations, it stated that in order to motivate or to promote this so-called, let's say, Swahili or whatever, people should use different media like the radio and news and all of that, right? But looking at political issues, looking at economic and social issues and geographical issues, how do you think, or what is the best way forward that you think, if you don't want for people to abandon their local languages to adapt the English language, what would be the best mechanism? And not just telling people the only way we can leave this is to go to local radio station or to read newspaper and all of that. So I just want to give me some practical,
Thank you, Joy. I think the problem with the languages in Tanzania is the languages that are in that danger. I think they're only local languages. Swahili is growing every day. There's no need, we need to do something to preserve it. Of course, the government has played a lot of different roles in promoting Swahili, especially now that they are asking this government department to change the text that were written in English into Swahili so that they can be accessible to the public, to the common people. So that's one thing that the government is also doing to kind of promote the use of Swahili. My example with using radio and expanding or extending exposure to the language was focused on English language. So I was thinking that if we want to teach English as a subject better and well, we should teach it early first, and then extend its exposure in the country, because English is not used really in Tanzania. It's a very, very limited context. So the only, I believe, maybe some ways to expand its use could be through, after school clubs, for example. You have to retain students before they go home, they engage in the using of the language through debate, through situational conversation. It doesn't have to be something that they learn in class, and at least with the current methods of teaching, when we students have to be listening to the teacher speaking throughout the class, we don't get time to engage, to use the language in the classroom. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was, and the radio program has worked in other contexts. I believe Rwanda, I think they're doing very well with that. So, because I would say every family household, at least all the family households have radio in their home. When we closed the school during the pandemic, the learning was moved to things like radio and television. And the radio was effective because kids would switch on the radio. You don't need even to have a power in your house. You just need to have batteries and listen to these programs. And those inputs. Sometimes listening and getting input is being exposed to the language itself. You do not sometimes have to be interacting or engaging with anybody else. So listening also helps. So that was my recommendation on using the radio programs and after school programs. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Muta, for that response. I want to go a question which has been in a chat for us. Thanks, Olawale, for sharing your question. I think it goes to Dr. Ngonyani. The question is, has there been any effort by the Tanzanian government trace a policy to save the endangered languages in Tanzania?
In short, there have been some pronouncements, but not quite a clear policy to save endangered languages. And again, in saving the languages may be a difficult thing. And they don't talk about saving those languages at all. I mean, I'm saying for the most part, until very recently, there has been some sort of passive sabotage of these languages that not much was done about them. And the only thing people cared about those languages is probably in traditional dances and songs and stuff like that. But other than that, and even when they told folk tales, for example, they were already told in Swahili, and everyone forgot about the language. So yeah, there hasn't been much of that. And it's sad that even linguists at one time were talking about, oh, who cares about those languages? We are all focusing our efforts on Swahili. So that.
Before I give you a thing, Malim, Lindsay, you have it's a comment, maybe an implied question, Lindsay. I'm going to give you a chance to say exactly what the question is. But before you, I also have a question. I don't, Damaris didn't tell me whether I'm allowed to ask a question, but let me ask the question, I'll find out later. When I went to Tanzania, Mwalimdeo and Muta, I think that was 2016, I take students for education abroad to northern Tanzania, Monduli district. I love that place and I love Tanzanians. Our Waidu took us to the game park. I was asking him the names of wild animals. And then there's one they told me, it's called a Thompson gazelle. So Thompson gazelle, I was saying, these are Tanzanian, and there's no Choti gazelle, there's no Ngonyani gazelle. And then this reminded me of Lake Victoria and the Thompson Falls in Kenya, and Isaac and Deo and Muta and Damaris and Jonathan. Those are my issues, current issues for me, and the language and the culture. Are the names, the foreign names, foreign cultures we are carrying, raising the flags very high, and where we know that we do have our native names, which have a meaning, They have a record to keep in our cultures. I think saving those languages, endangered languages, could be with the resources Ngonyani was saying, saving your name. If Damaris allows me, I'll drop Jonathan very soon. So long as she doesn't go to the court and get papers. Why are you changing it? I married Jonathan Choti. I did not marry Nyavuto Choti. I'm taking it very carefully, where I'm going to start a conversation about that. But anyway, it's not my time. I was facilitating, but that's another way I'm looking at it. We can recapture our culture, our names, easy by walking into the court down here in Lansing and drop that J-O-N-A-T. We have those letters in my language. I even don't know what Jonathan means. Anyway, Ngonyani.
So yeah, thank you very much for that. And that's the part I was talking about a little bit. I just mentioned about languages being the library of people's knowledge in their environment. I'm going to tell you again from my own experience now, because I haven't lived home for many years since I was in secondary school. When I go home now, I have forgotten many of the local plants there. I don't remember their names. Now, just not remembering their names is not a big deal. But the fact is, that means I also don't remember what was the common remedy for my stomach or my headache or whatever. That knowledge is disappearing fast. And you'd think that it's because I live far away. But even the kids who grow up there, now you just run to the hospital, right? And very effective remedies that were there, we don't remember them at all. So losing a language is actually forgetting how we lived in an area. And so we would take Thompson's gazelle or whatever, gazelle, and as if this is something that was brought by Thompson. And now we now we know, we don't even know now whether it's good meat or not. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Lindsay, back to you.
Oh, it wasn't a question. I think just in listening to talking about languages, I think the language that's used for talking about languages is really telling. Like oftentimes they're framed as problems. And that made me think of this it's very old, not now by academia standards, just the orientations for language planning, and language as a problem tends to be the deficit narrative around people's first languages. So how can we think of them as a resource, like what Mwalimu Deo was talking about? It reminds me of, I heard a story from a woman who was doing some revitalization of habitat in the western part of the US. And they noticed that a desert turtle was endangered, but they didn't know how to take care of it or what habitat it needed. So they were driving around and they had some indigenous botanists and scholars with them. And one of the women said, "Stop, this is the place," as they're driving around. And they got out and there are all these, plants growing in this valley. And she said, "The word for this plant in my native language basically means desert tortoise eats it." So like that knowledge of the natural world was all tied up in the language of the people, so much that even revitalization efforts are coming back to those languages to learn from that indigenous language. So again, not a comment, just thank you to you both for sharing this. I guess what my question might be is I wonder, like Muta has suggested, that continuing Swahili into the secondary levels would be more effective because more students are able to understand the content and they're not learning a new language on top of trying to learn challenging content. I'm wondering, this is more for Mwalimu Deo, do you think that having more of a focus on Swahili in Tanzania in secondary level might create more of an opportunity to revitalize some of the indigenous languages rather than having a triglossia aspect of also trying to focus on English as well? Or do you think it needs to be, or do you think that that wouldn't necessarily be the case? Do you think what Muta is proposing could support the revitalization of more indigenous languages? I guess is my question.
Yeah, so I have very confused views about the language of instruction in Tanzania. And what you're suggesting is probably one of those things. From my own experience, learning Swahili and studying Swahili, especially as a linguist, helped me understand a lot more about Swahili, and my language. It's learning English helped me understand those languages better. And that's probably also going to be the case as you're suggesting. But I can only say that there have been a lot of research done in Tanzania from the 70s that indicated, at that time, it was just red lights that things are not going well with the medium of instruction in secondary schools, and that something needed to be done. And the immediate suggestion at that time was that we should change the medium of instruction to Swahili throughout the education system. And this was taken with mixed feelings among people in the government. This was again repeated in the early 80s by a presidential commission, which Nyerere actually overruled, didn't want to change it to Swahili. And Muta was referring to the 2015 education policy. But if you go to that education policy, you're going to see item 3.2 point something that says Swahili is going to be the medium of instruction. And immediately next to that, it's going to say English is going to be the medium of instruction. So they're completely confused. They're saying both things. And therefore, there is no very clear decision made. Let me also tell you a little bit of a story. I'm an older person given to telling folk tales and stories all the time now. When I was teaching secondary school, Ifunda Technical Secondary School, a friend of mine went to the National Examinations Council where they were doing the corrections and grading. And when he came back, he told us a story. He was a biology teacher. He told us a story that there was a script, an exam script of a candidate who wrote, "I'm sorry, I cannot write this in Swahili, but if you consider my answer in English, so if you consider, please read my Swahili." And the answers were reasonable. No, they're not bad. But that person couldn't write in English. And that person failed because if they were allowed to get a grade, they would have an unfair advantage for that. So the thing is, it has been observed a lot of times that if the teachers would teach in Swahili and the exams were in Swahili, they would do better because they're teaching Swahili anyways. And they're giving them notes which they have to memorize. This is about exams. They memorize things and they don't understand what is going on. And then later they have to reproduce in exams. It's not working. So, and a lot of it has to, in my reflection, a lot of it has to begin with 1974, when the government, the ruling party decided that we wanted universal primary education immediately. But when that decision was made, there was no concomitant decision to have well-trained teachers available immediately. So you had a large number of students and a small number of qualified teachers and a majority of teachers who are not qualified at all, populating all the schools. And from there, it went downhill. Now, even when you say, okay, they should start English from standard 1, there are no teachers who can teach that. So I think they should just have a few years of very intensive English training, and then they can move on. My preference would be Swahili all the way to through secondary education and even at the university. I think they would do better with that. They're doing it in Swahili anyways at present. And that's a problem. But English is not taught well. And did I say even Swahili is not taught well?
Maybe I could have asked a question, but I want the audience to ask. But if the English, even Swahili is not taught well, and we have experts from Tanzania leading this discussion, what have you done to tell the leaders, like you guys are not teaching that Swahili well, leave alone English, and what can we do? Can they listen? But before, maybe you could say, make a comment, Muta Mwalimu, if I ask a question, if do you want to ask your question, or you want me to read it? If I can. The question is, what do you, Ike is asking, what do you say, I think he meant the presenters, about the school of thought that most African countries are European makings and they should be divided into smaller countries that have similar cultures and languages?
I would say we don't have to be divided into smaller countries. I think there is a strength in diversity. And so even with the smaller different polities or ethnic communities, we should actually be able to form large political units, and not necessarily the smaller ones that would actually be prey to these big multinationals and big Western countries. I think we should just use our diversity as a strength in some form or way.
I will also add, maybe from the side, maybe even that Europe also has small countries. I don't know who colonized and divided them, but they are small and they are thriving. The other thing is, the other thing I wanted to say, I don't want to forget this, even before colonialism, or even within colonialism, and I'm sure even after, we still have ethnic groupings. We have ethnic groups, which are naturally defined by diversity in culture and linguistic diversity. And even when we talk about the Bantu or Niger Congo, whether those labels are okay, but the fact is we have our own divisions, which is diversity. It's not a negative thing, which is a good thing. But some people who fall into the mistake of like, oh, we can exploit the diversity and make it negative and cause a division. That's where the approach is wrong. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong. Even the 13 of us here could represent 13 ethnic groups or countries. But still our presence here and the ideas we are sharing are just one thing, one content, and we are motivated to be here for 2 hours because we are committed to this. So the alliances those countries can make, if they were able to make them, could be very strong with the diversity notwithstanding. Amuta, do you want to say anything about that question, maybe, or you're good? Damaris, we are doing very well with the time. Our speakers did not speak for 45 minutes each, but I think they have added more as they answer questions. Any last comments or questions? Or back to you, Damaris, if we have anything to.
Yes, before we conclude, I want to ask a quick question. Maybe there's no answer to this, but is it Muta? I think it's Muta. You mentioned that English is a medium of instruction in private schools. Or no, is it private or most private schools or all private schools?
English medium private school.
They're called English, okay.
Yeah, they're calling English medium, yeah.
Yes, I think we had this discussion in a previous tea time where we were talking about the complexity of having English be used as a medium, even in my own country, Kenya. English is the language of instruction, yes, but then you realize that its usage in, let's say, private and well-to-do schools, it's more fluent, or the students, sorry, not the language itself, sorry, the students that go to those schools are more fluent given the kind of instruction they get, the teachers they have, more resources. So I'm even wondering, Tanzania, let's assume that the government or the Minister of Education was ready to explore the possibility of having maybe English be taught as a language, be one of the languages, either be taught as a subject or even as the language of instruction. Given that already the elite class is able to take their schools to the private school, who is going to take up this discussion of which language do we need? Like, who cares about which language? Because if I wanted my child to learn in whatever language, I'm able to take them to a school where they can learn that. So I just see the complexity of even pushing the policy of language. The people that are supposed to care would not care much if it's not affecting them necessarily. So it's not a question per se, but I'm just thinking harder that who is even going to take up this discussion seriously?
That's right. You know, the upper class in Tanzania is mostly politicians, and they take their kids to these elite schools, mostly private schools. It doesn't have to be, you know, English medium. Some of these politicians take their kids to international schools. And for that matter, they manage to pay for their kids' education. For the common Tanzanians who can't pay for their kids' education, that go take their kids to public schools, which are free indeed, are the ones that are suffering the consequences of their kids not being able to learn in the schools, like not learning at all. Maybe they are learning actually, but yeah, not effectively learning. So yeah. I think you're right. Having that, you know, you have a choice to take your kids to these private schools, and you have the money. That contributes to the delay of somebody's knocking at my door. Sorry.
Can I take up from there?
Okay.
So I think a lot of people care about this question, and if they were given choices, they would probably want to have their kids learn very efficiently, and they see that Swahili is going to be the language that they will be learning very efficiently. But at the same time, they also realize that the world today, if you're going to move up, you need English. Some of you may know about the fear that Tanzanians have about an open labor market in East Africa, right? That the Ugandans and Kenyans are going to fill all the jobs in Tanzania. So everyone is aware of that, but there is an unwillingness to actually find actual good solutions to this problem. And this is very historical. It has been there for forever. Oftentimes the solutions that they propose are just not going to work. When I was teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam, my department was considered anti-English, and it was our business to teach English. We were considered anti-English because we did not agree with the policies of the Ministry of Education and the kind of aids or financial support they were getting from outside of Tanzania that they sought, because they were not going to solve the problems. But yeah, I think a lot of people care about this, but the government and the political elite, I don't think they care too much, as long as, like Abdul said, they have the ability to send them to very good schools where they will. And I have another story about a friend who had his son go to an English medium school, and they were doing very well with English. But at the end, when they did the national exams, he failed miserably in the other subjects. So he did well in English, but didn't do well in, geography, chemistry, whatever. So the English was good, but the other subjects.
Yeah, that takes me actually on the last question. Maybe we're almost coming to an end, I'm sure. Lindsay, you will agree with me that Mwalimu Ngonyani and Mwalimu Muta, their English is good. I'm not able to judge because my English is not very good. So last question, Muta Nadeo, how come your English is good if Lindsay agrees with me? Lindsay?
I think that your English is good, so I don't know if you were.
Are they speaking good English, having school in Tanzania? That's the point. How did they survive this linguistic problem in the school system? To go all the way, study linguistics in the US and maybe teach English or Swahili. So a personal story, a quick one from Muta and Deo about how you survived this problem and then you succeeded. Did you go to an English medium private school? Did you go to public schools?
Okay, so I went to a private school, a seminary for my Form 1 to Form 4. So that was the transition from Swahili and then Form 1 English to and on. So that's, but I'm going to say that one of the big differences that I found was, compared to when I went back to teach years later, is that a lot of resources that were there when we were going to school are not available anymore, right? Muta talked about books, about teachers who are well trained. You don't find this anymore in the schools, and that makes a huge difference. But I learned more English after I came here, when I had to speak English all the time.
Muta, quick one.
That is what I wanted to say as well. But you know, so my passion to learn the language started very like early of my years in primary school. There was no opportunities, you know, for me to interact, engage with people, with English speakers. But then, you know, I made a like extra effort when I went to university, for example. I went to also public private school for my secondary education, which didn't make a huge difference, to be honest, because it was just a normal, regular private school. But just because I had a, you know, career ambition to teach the language, I spent so much time exposing myself to the language, you know, could be through listening, trying to speak whenever I got an opportunity. Because in Tanzania, there are, especially in the colleges, you can have the opportunity to use the language, but many students choose not to because they have an alternative. But if you want, yeah, you can try at least to speak a little bit in English. And then when I traveled to come here for my Fulbright program, that really helped. And until now, I don't consider myself an English speaker, but I'm trying.
Thank you for your personal stories. Is there anybody we have left out with a comment or a question before I hand over to Damaris to wind up and close today's session?
I just wanted to say quickly that concerning language in East Africa, Rwanda is currently in discussions with the government of Zimbabwe to import teachers from Zimbabwe to teach English in Rwandan schools. And that's a very interesting development. I mean, there's a lot of politics around it in regards to Zimbabwe, but I think it, I don't know, that's an experiment we should all be looking at to see how that will go, because there is no guarantee for success, but at least it answers one of the problems that both Mwalimu Ngonyani and Muta raised about the availability of resources.
Right.
That's a resource that they are importing.
Right.
I think you know, they will do well because you know, English has been a very important central subject in Zimbabwean education. Question is, how is that really going to change the things on the ground in Rwanda? And that may be a model to then replicate elsewhere if it works. Maybe you'll be importing Rwandese teachers to Tanzania to teach English. I don't know.
Yeah. I will not be surprised if that happens.
But how possible is that when Mwalimu Deo, you were talking earlier that we don't know if opening borders to intercontinental trade and engagement, it's a worry already. So I don't know if this It's going to be
Yeah.
a possibility even.
But that would be a temporary arrangement, though. I mean, it would be a temporary arrangement over a specific period of time. These people who are foreigners are given contract. I think even with the Zimbabwean case, they are not saying you guys can just come and live here. I think they're giving them 5 years or whatever amount of time. After you teach all these many Rwandese, you go back to your country, right? So that might help with this issue that now you have more people in Rwanda who speak English, and the jobs will not be taken away by somebody else.
I must also say that the Rwandese are very good at this. For many years, they imported Swahili teachers from Tanzania.
Right, right.
And other countries. And they're doing well now in Swahili. Swahili has spread and it's very strong in
Exactly.
Rwanda. They might succeed in English too.
They probably will. They probably will, because as you can see, they're not afraid to open the gates, you know, and they're not afraid to spend the money.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But the question is why they went all the way to Zimbabwe and they skip Kenya, and they are coming to the East African community as members, and actually they are. So Isaac,
that's a good question, but I think they calculated that they might find the Zimbabwean teachers for a cheaper dollar than
probably
because of the economic struggles in Zimbabwe right now. You know, every teacher in Zimbabwe wants to escape. So you get kind of a person rather than somebody you have to persuade by upping your financial offer.
In fact, if they went to Kenya, they will get volunteers. They might have not known that, because Kenyans are producing graduate teachers. They have known they cannot observe them. And so maybe they are not aware about that. But anyway, that's the politics behind language and our educational system. Back to Damaris. Thanks, guys. Thanks much.
Well, thank you so much to Mwalimu Choti for facilitating this discussion, and thank you to our presenters, Mwalimu Deo and Muta. It's really a privilege. I keep saying this, that it's not always a guarantee that we're going to have people within our community that are able to facilitate discussions of this nature all the time during our tea time. So thank you for your time, and we hope that another time that we invite you to continue a conversation like this, you'll be available for us. So I think we will just conclude. The only thing that I wanted to mention or remind you is about our next tea time that is going to be the last one this semester. I can't believe we're done with the fall pretty much. It's happening next week. And you remember tea times are always every other week, but because of Thanksgiving that is coming up in about 2 weeks, we are concluding our tea time earlier, so then we don't have to have people held up or, you know, considering which occasion to attend. So the tea time is going to be focusing on different countries, multi-countries, and it's a discussion that has been put together by a group of our alums who are here, and now they're running a program that they train graduate students on research methodologies and other things, just as a group, not within a particular institution. So it's going to be an interesting one as well, just trying to see what types of giving back that our alums are doing, given their other engagements. It's not necessarily that's what they're doing for their careers, but it's a way of their giving back. And I think it's an encouraging type of discussion that we're going to have. So I welcome you to join us again. It's Thursday, same time like today. But other than that, I want to thank everyone too that was able to come and stay until the end of the discussion. We will end it here and look forward to seeing you back again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, bye-bye.